So the title of this video and the inspiration is a book that is a classic guide to intelligent reading. It was written a long time ago by two gentlemen named Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. And the idea is not that we don't know. If you just want to pick up a book for leisure and just sort of read it, you pick it up and you just start at the beginning and you read to the end. But the first and most important thing that I want to highlight is there are different kinds of reading depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And so if you're just doing pleasure reading, then you don't necessarily need a whole lot of instruction after you know how to read, right? So what sounds did these letters make, and what do these words mean on the page? Once you've established this basic ability to read, then you can read what you want in the way you want it. But again, what I want to try and do is give you some ideas around how to approach academic reading, right? And so I'm going to use terminology from Adler and Van Doren. Right? And the first thing, so this idea of elementary reading, that's what I just described. Once you know how to read, you do elementary reading, right? So the elementary reader is the first grader who's now learned how to make words, and the cat sat on a hat. They know what all of those words mean. They don't necessarily care what that says about the cat. They don't care if it's factual. They don't care. They just want to be able to read the words. Far too many of us, though, stop with this kind of elementary reading, and we just look at what do the sentences say? What do they mean in isolation? But most authors aren't trying to make meaning for you with just simple sentences. They're putting together paragraphs and chapters and an entire book and a thesis and an argument that they're trying to persuade you to come along with them. They're trying to help you increase your understanding. You can't increase your understanding unless you work with the author. Is at least the contention that Adler and Van Doren pose. So we have this elementary reading, and most of us are reasonably accomplished at that, figuring out what the sentences say. But then we want to go and we want to look at the next level of reading, which is inspectional reading. Inspectional reading, in the author's words, is also thought of as systematic skimming. Right? So this is not an in-depth read of the material. This is a look at this is a look in a very cursory way to try to get a sense of what the arguments are. So this is my copy of How to Read a Book from 1991, when I was an undergrad. And I want to just show you a little bit about how I start my inspectional reading, right? So the first thing is you're going to look at the front and the back matter, right? So I start with the cover. What does it tell me? How to read a book. I'm not just a simpleton. It's saying it's a classic guide to intelligent reading, right? So it's trying to give me something more. You can look at the font and you know it's not a brand new book because of the typeface. I look at the back of the book. The back of the book will give me a little bit of a sense of what people were saying about it, how it's a living classic, that sort of thing. And then I skip, I go to the very front, and I look and I see copyright information, and I look and I say, holy crap, this was originally written in 1940, and in the most updated copy that I'm reading here is 1972. So this is, why does that matter? It tells you a little bit about the context the book was written in, right? This book was not written in 1742, but it wasn't written yesterday. So the people reading this information need to keep in mind the context that it was written in. Right? So 1940, think about this. It was originally written in 1940. What do we know about 1940? One of the things we know about 1940 is that there was no television yet, right? So reading was the method of information transfer the primary method of information transfer, right? So then I also read the table of contents. Frequently, students will get an assignment. It'll be, read pages, 6 to 36, and they'll just go to page 6 and they'll start reading. But you want to look at those table of contents because it lays out the argument that you're going to be reading from. Right? It tells you where it tells you where your reading fits into that larger argument. Right? So getting a sense of this, of the reading through the table of contents gives you a sense of what the argument is going to be. All right. Okay, so just for a little bit more detail, how this plays out for me when I do an inspectional reading, my family will joke that I haven't read a lot of books, I've read a lot of introductions. And one of the reasons that they say that is if you go to my library and you pull out a book, one of the things you'll find is that if you look at the beginnings or the ends of the book, you'll see in the middle of the book, you'll see very little notation, right? But then as you get to the front of the book, in the introduction, you're going to see a fair amount of notation. And so their joke is that he doesn't read the whole book, he just reads the introduction. Now that is not actually true. That is blasphemy, that is slander. But what it does indicate is that I am looking at the argument that the author is making. So the argument, and you want to keep this in mind not only for your reading, but for your writing, right? The introduction lays out your argument, and the conclusion tells you why anybody should have cared, right? The body gives you the evidence. Well, I don't need to, if the evidence lines up with the argument, I don't necessarily need to make notations on the evidence because it lines up with the argument, right? So I'm reading it for the argument, I'm reading it for the information. So that introduction is where I get most of that, and that's where I'm going to make most of my notations. I might go back to the introduction and make a note where I made a notation earlier about evidence, and I say see page 77 because something in the introduction refers forward, or something in the body refers back to the introduction. So that goes not just for books; it goes for all of the reading that you might do. But it plays out best in book form. It plays out most neatly in book form. Then the next thing that I'm going to do after I've done that reading of the introduction, I'll probably read the introduction fairly fully, and then I'll start reading. I'll do something like read the first and the last sentence of every paragraph to get a sense. So as I'm systematically skimming, I'm trying to figure out, and I might mark quickly, this is a paragraph that I want to go back to based on the first or the last sentence. Right, so you're going through quickly the material to highlight the places where you're going to go back and go through slowly. Right? Yeah, if I need to or if I'm told to, I'll move to the next level, which is analytical reading. Right? Now I have this sense, because I've done this systematic skimming of what the argument is and how it's laid out, right? Now I can do what Adler and Van Doren call good reading. Right? This is purposeful, thorough reading of the material. So I go back through and those paragraphs. Again, you may not necessarily be reading it sort of back to front like you would a novel. You might be reading particular paragraphs that you highlighted when you were systematically skimming, but you're going back in depth and you're trying to see where that argument went, clarifying what you didn't understand before, those sort of things. Right? So this is good reading, and what we're really getting to is this fourth level of reading, which Adler and Van Doren call syntopical reading. And this is, for my definition, would be comparative reading. Right? So this is where we have multiple readings by multiple authors, and you're trying to figure out how these readings enter into discourse with each other? How do they play together? How do they add up to something? Are they making one? Do all these authors make one single case? Are these authors arguing with each other? How do I see the balance between these things? What evidence? What evidence is compelling in which author's arguments? Right? And so this syntopical reading, this comparative reading, that's where we really get into true understanding. This is how we develop our personal philosophies, our personal understanding of how systems fit together in our world. So there's these four levels of reading. Obviously, everybody, if it's taking this course, one of these courses, can do elementary reading. Most of us are not particularly practiced at inspectional reading or systematic skimming, because remember, this is not just skimming through; it's systematic skimming. Right? It's going through with purpose, but you're skimming; you're not going in depth. Right? And this is really helpful because it helps you to get through a lot of material in a relatively short amount of time. Then you go back and you go in depth into the places that this reading compels you to, or you need to. And finally, you start to pull together this comparative understanding. And in the case of a course, you're comparing not just to other readings that you've done, and you might be comparing, you will include readings you've done outside of the course. You'll be comparing to other kinds of media that you've consumed outside of the course, and other material you've consumed inside the course. And that includes our conversations, our discussions, and your discussions with classmates, right? So all of these things lead to a greater understanding if you take it methodically, systematically. You take a strong approach to reading, you will have a strong result in your learning. So I hope that was helpful to you in your assignments and in your preparation, and long term in reading you'll do in the future. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Hayden@hartford.edu.